Alrighty, thanks for tuning in once again. It's Ishmael Sistrom from the St. Louis American and STLamerican.com, back with you with our weekly boxing roundup in the clinch. With me today, I got a man, hadn't been on the show in a while due to some scheduling conflicts, but glad to have you back on the scene, Mr. Factoid, E. Allen. Factoid, how's it been, man? How's it been going?
It's been going all right, man. I can't complain. Life is good. It's good to be back on with you today, be able to talk a little bit of boxing and a couple good fights last night I think we can recap.
Absolutely, absolutely. Mike, my normal co-host, Mike Dixon, isn't with us today. Looking forward, hopefully next week he'll be able to be back because it's been a while since all three of us have been on a show at the same time. So, Factoid, you've been missed out there. People will send me messages saying, hey, where's Factoid? So people definitely appreciate you and glad to have you here as the wingman with me today. So let's get into it about the fights this week. The main one, the headliner, everybody, of course, loves a knockout artist. And we had Triple G, Gennady Golovkin, in the ring with Daniel Geale. Me and Mike talked about it last week. We both figured that Golovkin, this would be another fight for him that he would look well in. Thought Geale may give him, a competitive fight for a little bit. Maybe the first half of the fight he'd be competitive. That really wasn't the case. Golovkin imposed his will pretty much from the get-go, and I think that stoppage was, third round, correct?
Yeah, third round stoppage, man.
All right, so Factoid, I know you're a Golovkin fan. What do you take away from this fight, and how did Golovkin look during those 3 rounds?
Man, this was, as we kind of knew coming in, the biggest name in terms of the step up in competition for him. So everybody was curious, to see what Geale would bring to the table. I thought for the first round, Geale actually looked pretty decent. I thought he was out there to win the fight, to try to make make it his fight in the first round. And unfortunately, the second, you had that weird slip where he slipped over the cameraman. At one point, and then in the second round, it was just, all downhill. He got caught with that kind of clipping shot from the shoulder to the side of the head. Never really, I think, got back in the fight. Golovkin, there was nothing that Geale was able to bring to the table in terms of his punching power that kept Golovkin off of him. And despite trying to let his hands go a little bit on the inside, you could just tell the man with the harder, thudding shots was Golovkin. In the third round, he got him against the ropes again. Closing seconds, probably, 30 seconds, something left in the round. Hits him with a huge right hand. And I give a lot of credit to Daniel Geale because how often do you see a damaged fighter say, okay, I'm going to go back out there and fight? Daniel Geale's like, no, I'm shaky. The referee got to the count of 9, count of 10. He was like, hey, do you want to continue? He was like, no, I can't do it. So for a guy to be, not there, all there mentally in that moment, he was, aware enough and cognizant enough to say, no, I've had enough. But, for Golovkin, another just solid performance. You don't get a lot of rounds, but you just saw him continue to be very effective, very aggressive, did some good body work. He was a little bit off, and I don't know if that was the speed maybe of Geale, some of the movement that he was using, but we saw Golovkin miss a lot more punches than I think we've become accustomed to seeing him miss. But overall, you get a guy there in 3 rounds, a world-class fighter like Geale, praise to Golovkin, and his fan base just continues to grow.
Now, you said you give Geale credit, for being smart enough, I guess, to know when he's had enough. Some people may look at that situation and argue with you. They may say, hey, he made it to his feet. Why doesn't he have that warrior's mentality? Like you said, we see a lot of boxers who, you pretty much have to knock them out or their corner has to step in for them because they want to go until they can't go anymore. So why do you give him credit on that as opposed to saying, oh, man, maybe he doesn't have that heart? Or what would you say to a fan who says, man, that dude has no heart, he gave up, while he was up at the count of 10? I
think when you, first and foremost, you just said it, explaining it to a fan. You're not in the ring. You're not taking them big shots to the head. If a guy has gotten hit upside the head multiple times and he has the faculty about himself to say, I've had enough, you have to respect that because we look at so many fighters that are legendary. You can talk about Muhammad Ali, where he is now, James Toney, and so on and so forth, guys who years down the road, they can't hardly speak, they're not clear. This guy said, hey, I got my bell rung, I'm still hurt. He recognized that, man. That says a lot about, I think, how sharp he was and still aware while being, hurt bad.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, just being honest about it, if he would have continued, how much longer do you think he really would have lasted? I mean, it would have been like you said, that didn't happen until late in the round. But even if he would have continued, Golovkin would have had him out of there by the end of the round, or if by some miracle he held on and made it. He was already damaged goods because it seemed like, um, you know, by the second round, every time Golovkin really hit him with a good shot, it hurt him. You could tell he would wince at the body shots. He would take a step back on the head shots. And Golovkin again proved that he is that guy. He is this Terminator. Go seek and destroy. Geale, of course, he isn't a world beater. He's a world class fighter, but he's not a great champion or anything like that. So there's still some unanswered questions from Golovkin. But I think he did his job. He came out there to get a knockout, to look impressive, and that's what he did. And you said you talked about him missing a lot and him, maybe not looking up to form. I think Golovkin is a guy where, maybe in the first few rounds he fills out his opponents because we've seen that he's very good at cutting off the ring. I think early Geale was using a lot of movement, and Golovkin just had to get used to that. He's a guy kind of like Kovalev, who we'll mention a little bit later, but he studies his fighter a little bit, and then once he figures out their movement, their rhythm, then he starts to stalk. So I think that's what we saw from Golovkin. I don't think that really raised too many red flags for me. Then again, it was only 3 rounds, so if Geale would have given him trouble for 6 or 7 rounds, then maybe I'll say, okay, I don't know. But just for that to happen in the first round while they're still trying to fill each other out, I'm not too concerned about that. What do you think is next for Golovkin? They talked about trying to get him in there against a championship style fighter, a bigger, higher profile matchup. What do you think is going to happen next for him?
Man, that's a tough call. I mean, we saw a little bit of pressure from Max Kellerman in the post-fight, and they kind of got Golovkin to go ahead and say he wanted Miguel Cotto. I don't know if that's, for me, I don't know if that's the wisest fight for Miguel Cotto. You may be now the champion there at 60. I think you've seen a guy with a tremendous skill set, but Miguel Cotto's best weight was multiple weight classes ago, despite the fact now he's a middleweight champion of the world. He went in there, he took care of business against Sergio Martinez, so I don't take anything away from Miguel. I think, though, against Golovkin, I think he's definitely the smaller man. And you talk about a guy who hits with bad intentions is a guy like Golovkin. So it could be an interesting style matchup, but I think it'd be one where, Golovkin would definitely be favored, despite the experience and the fact that Cotto's fought the best in the world. I don't know if that fight happens, though, Ish, to be honest. I could see, as Golovkin kind of mentioned, hey, Sam Solomon, I'm here. Kid Chocolate, I'm here. I could see an easier fight getting made with Sam Solomon, a way for him to again unify a title belt. Maybe the Kid Chocolate fight could at some point possibly happen, go on kind of a unification mission and see what happens with Cotto and who he decides to challenge, at 160 for the title. Is that, what's the young Saul Canelo Alvarez? Does he move up and fight Cotto? Do they have some sort of bash? Then you've got, Alvarez versus, Golovkin, which could be a really nice sell. So I think there are some good options for him. Not exactly sure, though. I think it's probably easier to see Sam Solomon and Kid Chocolate and some of those smaller named belt guys go first.
Yeah, if I'm Miguel Cotto, first I'll say as a fight fan, I'd love to see that matchup. I do think Golovkin, as the bigger guy, I think he has that advantage. Martinez was bigger, but he looked pretty much washed up. But yeah, we've seen Cotto have issues with bigger fighters. As a fight fan, I'd like to see that fight, though. But if I'm Miguel Cotto, in this new age of business first boxing, why do I get Golovkin, who, while he's growing in popularity amongst boxing fans, there are other higher profile guys where you can get more money and there's less of a risk to your body. So yeah, I don't necessarily see that fight happening next, but it would be a great one. I'd be interested to see it.
The Garden would go crazy for it, man. I mean, just if we saw, they opened up and they talked about the big room at the Garden for Golovkin now. He definitely has a fan base seriously on the East Coast that's continuing to grow. You already know Cotto packs the Garden every time out. So, for New York City, that could be a really, really special fight. But if I'm Miguel, man, I avoid it like the plague, like Carl Froch said.
Yeah, and I was going to ask you about that. What do you make of those comments? Because I've heard a couple different interpretations. I don't have them right in front of me, so I'll uh, paraphrase. Basically, he said uh, he would avoid Golovkin like the plague. He said that guy hits like a mule. Why would he stand in there and fight him, or why would he fight him? Do you think that he was saying he wouldn't fight him at all, or do you think he was saying if he was in a matchup? I think the term he used would I would swerve him, or swerve around him or something like that. Do you think he was saying in a matchup, he would be mobile instead of standing and trading?
I honestly think Carl Froch was saying, I'm not going to fight him. I don't want to fight him. It's not a good – and I think one of the lines was, that's not a good fight for me. That's not a fight I need to take. So I think Carl Froch understands, he's not the youngest guy now. He's not a spring chicken himself anymore. Yeah, he entertains. He packs, the stadiums. Guys, people love Carl Froch. But, Golovkin, again, as you just kind of alluded to, is on the way up now. He's kind of hitting that peak, that mental, physical peak. He's moving forward. A guy like Froch, you come off a good win against George Groves in the rematch. The first fight was questionable. So I think for Carl Froch, he's like, I don't know if this is the fight. Understands the media hype, the internet hype, the Twitter hype. Back and like, come on, Froch, fight this guy. He's like, no, I don't think I need any part of that if I want to keep my faculties about myself. So I think Froch is basically saying, no, I don't want it.
Well, that disappoints me a little bit. I love Carl Froch. I guess he's earned that right. I found a quote. I'll read it verbatim. It's just swerve Golovkin like the plague. He punches like a mule. I don't need to be in with him. Dangerous fight. And it does sound like, yeah, he doesn't want any part of him. But I had heard like I said, some chatter that it was taken out of context a little bit, that he was talking about if he were in the ring with him. But if he's saying he doesn't want to fight them, it's a little disappointing, because I feel like you should want to take out the best. You should want to be the best, and I think that would be an exciting, action-packed fight. But we have seen lately, Froch has been hurt. He's been touched a little bit, so I guess that gets into your mentality. Let's move on. Let's talk about the heavyweight matchup, and this is something I wish Mike was here, because he was really excited about the matchup between Bryant Jennings and Mike Perez. Jennings ended up winning a split decision. A little bit of controversy with a point deduction that happened in the final round. I guess before we get to that point deduction, let's talk about the fight. Were you excited about this fight? What did you expect to see, and did it turn out the way that you thought?
I was intrigued by the fight. I won't necessarily say that I was overly excited about it, but I was intrigued by it because I liked what I had seen in terms of the skill set from Mike Perez, especially in the fight against, I believe, Aldousamamov, and I probably butchered his name, so forgive me. But I thought, he let his hands go really well, some good combinations, a Cuban heavyweight. So I enjoyed kind of what I saw from Mike Perez. And then you look at, the opponent in Bryant Jennings. Had seen him fight on NBC Sports, like a year or so ago. He was on his way up. We talk about him as one of the few American heavyweights right now that maybe could do something. So there was some intrigue, I think, in the fight. I expected it to be, a pretty even contest, and for the most part, that's what it was. It wasn't exciting. It was kind of I know I heard your guy here last week, Roach. He talked about, going to sleep on fights. This was one where I think you could have easily tapped out to it. It wasn't a lot of high-octane action, but at the same time, it was two solid heavyweights trying to make, I guess you could say, a statement. Jennings is raw to a certain extent, doesn't have a whole lot of experience, but, did his best out there. I thought he was getting beat early in the fight, but adjusted kind of in probably about the fourth, fifth round, started to kind of control it a little bit, and won some of those middle rounds to get himself back in it. And I think really even some of the probably 8 and 9 couple rounds got away as I have here, but I thought he won the late rounds and closed out really well. Mike Perez, I expected more. Thought he'd be in better condition. Thought he let his hands go more, and had he been in better condition, maybe he could have done that. But, fourth, fifth round, you just saw a guy who was winded and tired and didn't really look like he wanted to execute, wanted to blow the kisses and stick his tongue out more than actually throw punches. And, if this is an eliminator bout, you got to be prepared. And you could tell that Mike Perez just wasn't ready to be able to go the distance. This is a 10-round fight. It was a 12-round fight, but the way they fought was like, you weren't ready for that. Like, it was a 10-round fight. So, the conditioning by Mike Perez was disappointing, but I thought it would be close, and it was.
Yeah, definitely was a close fight. I wasn't really excited at all. Wasn't really intrigued about it. For me, there's not too many names in the heavyweight division right now that intrigue me. And so, I figured it would be. It was a good matchup. I'm not going to argue against that. But I literally, you talked about falling asleep on the fight. I literally fell asleep towards the end of the fight, and the end is actually when it picked up. Once you got to the championship rounds, we saw the action pick up a little bit. So, when I went back on the DVR and watched the rest of it, the ending was actually the best part. But I mean, it was just a lot of nondescript. A lot of it was Perez. Again, he really, I don't know if it was conditioning or if it was just that strategy of kind of mucking it up. But he would throw, a couple shots, and he would hold every time. He would push Jennings' head down. He would, bully him up against the ropes. There was really not much sustained action. And you can't blame Jennings for that too much. I think his corner had it right. His corner kept telling him, when he holds you, when he grabs you, step back, work out the clinch, throw uppercuts, throw body shots out of the clinch. And I think if he would have done more of that, he would have had even more success. I don't think it would have been a disputed decision or a split decision if he would have worked out of those clinches. But we see so many fighters nowadays, when they get clinched, when they get held, they pretty much stop, or they may throw, a few little body shots that without any meaning behind it. But I think whenever you have a free hand, when you're in there with a guy that wants to muck it up, you have to work. You have to throw those uppercuts. You have to dig to the body. And he didn't do that until very, very late in the fight. I do want to talk about that point deduction that was taken in the 12th round. The commentators, they thought that it was heavy-handed, that there should have been a warning. Did you think that point deduction was warranted, or do you think because it ultimately decided the fight? It would have been a draw if that point deduction wasn't taken. What do you think about that?
I think it's unfortunate that it worked out that way, that 1 point was the difference, but the fight was that close. So here you have it. Throughout the fight, Harvey Dock I thought he did a fine job of trying to be very lenient. He was lenient with Mike Perez for holding behind the head. He was lenient for Perez for leaning in with that shoulder. He was lenient for Perez for doing a lot of pushing. He was lenient to Bryant Jennings for a couple shots behind the head. So I thought throughout the fight, he warned both guys on a lot of different occasions. If you notice, and you really got to go back and watch, at the end of the 11th round, both guys threw after the bell. And Harvey Dock, in between rounds, at least this is what I heard them say, Harvey Dock went over and mentioned, hey, you can't do that. You got to stop at the bell. So they had a little bit of action right there, a couple punches after the 11th round that were exchanged. So you go into the 12th, referee's probably thinking about it. The fighters aren't necessarily thinking about it as much. You got a situation where, I thought he threw a punch. The referee said stop. There was a second in there. He threw the punch. I thought it was intentional. So I thought the point deduction was warranted because it was a blatant shot after the referee had given a clear warning to stop. So with that, it's unfortunate that was the point that kind of changed the fight. It would have been a draw. But I think the referee handled himself well, and for them to be criticizing Harvey Dock and his performance, I thought that was kind of underhanded by a couple of the commentators from HBO.
Yeah, I agree. And you took the long way to politically correct avenue. I'll say I thought that, Max Kellerman sounded foolish, and the guys, sounded foolish who were really criticizing him, saying he should have given him a warning, he should have given this and that. I went back and watched it, and the referee says stop 3 times before that punch was thrown. He actually said stop for the 4th time when the punch landed. So he's clearly calling for a break in action. He's telling you to stop, and Perez had been, pretty dirty, the entire fight with leaning on his neck, with doing all that. So for me, just the fact that, I'll let you get 1. If I say stop, I'll let you get 1. I may let you get 2, but you can't get, 3 full directives of me telling you to stop and then throw a punch. Like you said, that means that's a second or that's 2 seconds after the fact. It's not like you're punching at the bell or you're starting to throw a punch, the bell rings, and you finish it off. Like, that's different because it's right there in the action. But this one, the ref says stop, 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 and then he threw the punch, and landed. So I thought that was a clear violation. I had no problem with that point deduction. I really wish, that he would have given us a more stern warning earlier in the fight, because I hate it when I see fighters leaning their forearm on somebody's neck. I hate that with a passion. I mean, every once in a while it's going to happen if you have a shorter fighter or you got somebody bent over. It may happen naturally, but he used that as a tool the entire fight. So I really wish that the referee would have said something more stern earlier. But I think it was a combination of, he made it, a little grimy for the entire fight. And like you said, that previous round, he gave him a warning as the round ended. So I think he thought about giving a warning, I think, because he paused for a second and then he said, no, you know what? I'm going to take this point. And I think it was valid. And I think that's his own fault. If you're going to have that type of strategy, you have to be prepared to deal with the consequences. And ultimately, that cost him the fight.
And one thing, man, going back to, Kellerman and not Larry Merchant, but what's my guy's name? Letterman. You're in a position when you're on, national television, on cable television, where you can slander a referee, you can slander a judge, and you can sway then the public opinion for that particular person. You can cost them maybe, opportunities down the road because of what you've put out there that may not necessarily be true. So I think in a lot of cases, man, these folks have to be held more accountable for what they're saying. We all see the judges, oftentimes you got wide judges on cards, this, that, and the other. And now you start to hear them make more case of that. In this case, I don't think Harvey Dock did anything wrong. This wasn't a bad stoppage. Harvey Dock took a point from a guy that hit on the break late. How can you be upset about that? How can you slander this guy and say he totally blew it? I just think they were out of line, and they need to be held more accountable for that.
I agree. All right, let's anything with these next week's matchups coming up. Nothing really high profile. You got Brandon Rios versus Diego Chavez, Jesse Vargas, Anton Novikov, Sergey Kovalev. Mentioned him a little earlier. He's going to be fighting Blake Caparello. Any of those, none of those are really high-profile matchups, but do any of those intrigue you, or which of those are you most looking forward to?
Well, Kovalev, just like the guy we just saw last night in, Golovkin, Kovalev is a knockout artist. He's been dropping guys at 75. So I'm interested to see him get back in there. Adonis Stevenson didn't necessarily look all that great in one of his most recent outings, and there was always that kind of talk about those two guys hooking it up finally. So Kovalev is as fans are looking for knockouts, you want to see a knockout, look for Kovalev. So I'm looking forward to maybe checking his fight out. And then really the continued maturation, I guess you could say, of Jesse Vargas. I mean, he's a name that's been in boxing now for a few years. He's been a prospect, for Golden Boy. He's moved kind of his way up a little bit. Will Jesse Vargas continue to take those next steps to being a superstar? So I'm curious to see, what does he bring next, to the table? Did he work on some things in camp from his last fight? Jesse Vargas can be entertaining. But again, will he continue to take the right steps and grow as a fighter and reach the potential that I think they've been, waiting for him to get to for a little while? So I'm curious about both those fights. I'm not curious about Kovalev because I believe it's going to be a KO, but curious about Jesse Vargas.
Yeah, and I'm definitely looking forward to the Kovalev matchup. Not that I think it's going to be a tough matchup or anything, but you like to see knockout artists. I mean, those guys sell themselves. When you have somebody who's just getting people out of there on a consistent basis, it doesn't matter the talent level, it's not just bums. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what he does. Can he outdo Triple G? Can he try to get his man out of there before 3? Will it take him longer? It'll be interesting. So I really like Kovalev. Hopefully we'll get to see him against a guy like Adonis Stevenson soon, or somebody else. I noticed a little talk of Bernard Hopkins earlier, of him trying to get one of those matchups. But he's a guy like Golovkin where I think he's ready for that big matchup. He's ready for that headliner, but you just got to get the right opponent for him. So that should be interesting. One last little thing I want to touch on. I'm not sure if you read it. There was an article on ESPN, Dan Raphael, about the Golden Boy situation with Oscar De La Hoya, Richard Schaefer. Did you get a chance to read that at all before I even opened that can of worms?
I have not read it, but I mean, the situation is fluid. So fill me in. Maybe it's something I did maybe I did see it and maybe kind of missed it. Fill me in.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of talk about that breakup, of course, but it was an interesting article because they talked about, kind of shady. They kind of painted Schaefer as a shady, individual. We know that De La Hoya's had some issues with, um, going into rehab and having some things like that. But they said while he was in rehab, kind of at his lowest point, that Richard Schaefer was trying to negotiate a sale of Golden Boy Promotions, where he would have remained, a shareholder. Um, oh my goodness, what's the manager? Al Heyman would have gotten a piece of it. And while Oscar was basically drugged up in rehab, they brought him this, 100-page contract. Like, hey man, you got to sign this. We got to get out now. And he really didn't discover until later. They said he had agreed to a sale of for $100 million. But later, going through with lawyers and kind of peeling it back like an onion, he kind of saw, all this different layers where Heyman was going to be involved, where Schaefer was still going to be involved, and it started to make sense about, hey, a lot of these Heyman fighters who have been fighting under Golden Boy, they're not really under contract. They've just been on a per fight basis, and me and Mike talked about that a while ago. Like, that's kind of weird. Like, that's kind of shady, where half of your fighters really aren't your fighters. So it seemed like there might have been something going on, but we can talk about that next week. I'm sure Mike will want to chip in on that. Hopefully he'll be back, and you'll have a chance to read that and give an informed response. But to anybody who hasn't read that yet, go to ESPN.com. Dan Raphael's a great boxing columnist. Check it out and let us know what you think about that shady Golden Boy situation.
It's not, with all the back and forth, I'm going to definitely try to read it. But with all the back and forth now, Oscar not happy with Schaefer, Schaefer not happy. You see Al Heyman definitely all in the middle of the situation because he's got all the fighters. So it's really messy. I don't know what necessarily to make of it, but at the end of the day, we continue to miss out as fight fans on some really good matchups. So I definitely want to read it. I'm interested in that. But one thing I did want to say real quick, I thought you guys had a great discussion last week on the Canelo and the Lara fight. And I just wanted to quickly jump in. I was someone who scored it very close. I had it 115, 113 for Lara. I thought you guys were right spot on, though. A close fight could have went either way. And, for me, I just didn't see the improvement, in Canelo in that particular fight, that I needed to. I still saw him kind of following, throwing punches. I just wanted to put that out there that, Canelo he's definitely was a pay-per-view fight that shouldn't have been on pay-per-view. So I agree with what Mike said. But at the same time, I just didn't see the improvement in him. And if Canelo is going to become that star that they expect, the Mexican fight fans and fight fans expect, he's going to have to develop his game. He's going to have to work on his craft because right now the improvement wasn't there. And if Lara had more than, pop, 1-2 and had some gas in the tank, I think he could have had a convincing win.
Yeah, really, Canelo, his people, they need to go. They need to take him to Golovkin's camp maybe. They need to take him to Kovalev because those are guys who are kind of similar in stalking styles. They're not really, fast, athletic guys, but they know how to cut off the ring pretty good. And for Canelo, I mean, he was just terrible at cutting off the ring. He didn't cut off the ring at all. Like you said, he just followed him around the ring the whole time. Again, the reason I scored the fight for him is because he was trying to make the fight. He did unleash combinations to the body. A lot of people did, kind of dismiss body shots. I thought he did some good body work, but he didn't look good at all. He looked terrible. Lara pretty much gave the fight away, in my opinion, just by the fact that he didn't want to engage at all. But definitely, again, a close fight. I hate that every time there's a close fight, people scream robbery, bloody murder. Oh, this is so fake. Boxing is rigged. Like, no, it's not. It was a close bout. 3 different subjective judges. Sometimes we get robberies in boxing, but that wasn't one of them. But I was interested to hear your opinion on that, so glad that you shared.
No doubt. It was, like I said, I was looking forward to the fight, and in the end, I didn't fall asleep on it. I watched it. I was kind of geeked up for it, but it did underwhelm certainly from both guys. But we'll see what happens. A rematch, it's not a sexy sell, so you can't even really see a rematch happening, even though there's a controversial win for one guy, and you can argue it. It's not attractive enough to make a rematch. So, both guys probably end up moving on, and nothing really comes out of that. Neither guy really impressed.
Nope, not at all. And you know what I noticed, man? It seems like every time we get these close decisions like that, man, you're on the opposing side. Like, we don't see eye to eye. We're different. It would be a split decision if we were the judges, man. So always interesting to see, but I definitely value your opinion. You're probably right more of the time than I am, because I definitely know you know your stuff, man.
I try. Look, I make a lot of mistakes, man. I make a lot of mistakes. But in the end, you have to have, look, Mike comes in. He's our judge right down the middle. He sees it. We see it on opposite sides, right and left. Mike sees it down the middle, usually for me. So that works out.
There you go. So anybody out here in YouTube land, if you want to schedule a fight and you need some judges, hit us up on In the Clench. You can fly us to your town, or actually probably catch a bus or something like that. We'll catch a Greyhound, or just walk around the corner at the park. But you got 3 judges. We're ready to go. All right, Factoid, if people want to reach out to you, man, where do they find you, and what are you up to these days?
Absolutely, man. I actually got back on Hailstorm Sports Radio last Thursday for a little show. Missed it this Thursday. Hopefully be able to get back on. Had some internet problems here at home. But definitely hoping to get back on, do a little sports with Mr. Factoid this coming Thursday. For the most part, folks, hit me up on Twitter. I think the handle's at the bottom of my page. That's MRFACTOID, Mr. Factoid there on Twitter. Talk about everything. Rams football season coming up. I know Palmer over there at the American is getting geared up for that. Shout out to the Rams. Training camp is back, so we can talk any and all sports anytime, all time.
Yeah, absolutely. We actually went out to Rams camp Friday and Saturday, so we're going to have some video coming up on that tomorrow. Throughout the week, actually, we'll probably have videos with that. So definitely tune into that. Definitely go follow Factoid. Like I said, he is a knowledgeable guy, and we appreciate you, man. We won't keep you guys any longer. Again, I'm Ishmael Sistrunk with the St. Louis American and STLAmerican.com, here with Mr. Factoid, E. Allen, and we will see you next week. Peace.